Thank you for listening to 10,000 Worlds, written and read by Weston Gill. That's me. This is part 10, containing chapters 91 to 100. If that's ahead of where you are in the book, I recommend going back and listening from the beginning, or where you left off. If you're all caught up, I hope you enjoy this next part. Thank you. Chapter 91, Relief. Emily, you try your power, Nina's voice cut through the overlapping panic. Emily flinched despite having expected the request. For a moment, she said nothing, unable to admit to herself or anyone else that the idea of losing her power was a relief. Real, breath-deep relief. She glanced toward Aaron, who stood strangely calm amid the noise, and wondered why he didn't look as shaken as the rest of them felt. Emily? Jake's voice sharpened the tension. She drew in a slow breath and turned towards the waiting faces. On who? She asked quietly. Her eyes found Aaron. He nodded once, steady and reassuring. No one volunteered. Jake exhaled and lifted a hand. Just use it on me. I've felt it before. Relief rippled through the room. No one argued. All right, Emily said. Her voice felt thinner than she expected. She hesitated again, suddenly aware of every pair of eyes on her. The pressure settled heavily in her chest. A bead of sweat slid down her temple. Cup broke the silence. You gonna go or what? Emily shot him a glare. Aaron laughed softly. It's fine, Em. Tell him to do anything. If it works, Nina can cleanse it. That didn't help. If it worked, and Nina couldn't fix it because her powers didn't work. She met Jake's gaze again. He nodded once, tense but willing, fists clenched at his sides. Emily exhaled. Jake, do 10 jumping jacks. That's it? He asked, smirking. She already knew. The power wasn't there. The familiar pull was gone. The invisible pressure that always accompanied her commands was absent. She closed her eyes and felt relief flood her chest. Then she heard the soft thump and clap. Her eyes snapped open. Jake was jumping. Once. Twice. Then he stopped and laughed. Nah, it doesn't work. Jake! Emily shouted. Laughter broke the tension. Uneasy chuckles spread through the room, and voices softened, and shoulders lowered. Why does Cup's power still work? Jake asked. Are you doing something different? Cup shrugged, unimpressed. No idea. I don't even know what my power does, besides glow. You should try to make it do something, Jake said. Like what? Cup asked, already grabbing a beer. He took a long drink, then waved vaguely. Nah, I'm gonna go smoke. He pushed through the group towards the door. Gantz followed immediately. Body system, he said firmly. 2 people at all times. No one argued. Why are you worried? Emily asked quietly when she returned to Aaron's side. Nothing to worry about yet, he murmured. She studied him, unsettled by how certain he sounded. Let's make food, Aaron said loudly, changing the subject, and figure out what we're going to do next. Nina headed for the kitchen and found Stephanie already rifling through the fridge. What? Stephanie said defensively. I'm a nervous eater. Nina smiled faintly and joined her. Outside, burgers hissed on the grill. Conversations restarted it with softer currents. Emily slipped away from it all. She closed the door of her shared room behind her and let herself fall onto one of the beds. For the first time in her life, her head felt quiet. No pressure. No constant awareness. No invisible leech wrapped around every thought. She felt normal. The relief was so sudden it made her dizzy. She closed her eyes and breathed. And for the first time since childhood, she was simply herself again. Chapter 92, Strategy. Selfish waited longer than she should have before finally voicing the questions that had been coiling tighter in her chest with every passing second. Why did we just leave? She muttered, more to herself than her commander. When no answer came, the words spilled out faster. Why did we confront them at all? Why say his name? You called him Rylan, the Worldbreaker. She hesitated, then pressed on anyway. I don't understand the purpose of all that. The transport skimmed low over the city, adaptive camouflage bending light around its hull. They flew beneath standard air lanes, far enough from rooftops that the standard engine noise would vanish into background. From the outside, there was nothing to see. Inside, the silence stretched. Eventually, Mora sighed. Selfish turned toward her, hope flickering despite herself. Shouldn't we have recruited them? She asked. They're powerful, trained even. Mora didn't look at her when she answered. Rylan, she hesitated. The Worldbreaker is alive, and he has already recruited them, or, at the very least, poisoned them against us. Selfish froze. We can't trust them, Mora continued, staring out through the darkened viewport. Training them further would be no different than inviting spies or traitors into our ranks. The Worldbreaker is alive? Selfish whispered. He was never dead, but he is the single greatest threat that the Shapers have ever faced. Selfish shook her head, struggling to reconcile the words. Greater than the Sanctuary judges? The High Council? The Remnant Code? The Soul School? Mora exhaled slowly. The judges are a hindrance at worst. They will not leave Sanctuary to hunt us. The High Council is smaller than we are, and weaker. The Remnant Code, she paused, and then continued. They may become a threat, but not yet. And the Soul School is a school. They know better than to involve us. She finally turned, fixing Selfish with a hard look. Rylan is one man, Selfish said weakly. How can he be worse than all of them? One man, Mora agreed, who the Shapers believe to be the most powerful core to ever walk any world. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. One man with the intellect, patience, and resolve to oppose us. One man who understands our systems well enough to dismantle them. One man whose departure was so dangerous that we had to conceal it with his death, because the truth would have fractured the Shapers from within. Selfish felt her mouth fall open. Make no mistake, Mora said. Rylan will not face us without preparation, and he will not be defeated by numbers. Silence followed. Then Selfish forced herself to speak. The judges said our punishment would be banishment to a Noctium world. What does that mean? Mora met her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek before she wiped it away. I suppose it means I won't be returning to Sanctuary, she said quietly. Then a bitter chuckle escaped her. A shame. That city is a miracle. What is a Noctium world? Selfish pressed. Mora turned back to the window. When the average essence level of a world rises beyond its natural equilibrium, the result is catastrophic. Catastrophic? Selfish echoed. Mora nodded. Whatever force regulates essence across worlds initiates a correction. It purges all excess essence and restores the world to its baseline. Selfish stared, still not understanding. Mora continued. There is a natural event. It sweeps through the world. It removes all essence, all portals, all connection to outside universes. Selfish made a small, horrified sound. Yes, Mora said, all life is purged. Entire biomes erased. The world must begin again. But all life requires essence, Selfish whispered. Yes, it is absolute, Mora continued. She hesitated, and then added, Rylan claims to have found a survivor, a being that endured the correction. The Shapers believe it may be possible to prevent future Noctium events. What good would that do? Selfish asked numbly. Mora turned back to her. The Shapers intend to build our own sanctuary, a controlled world, one where we exist in a stable biological environment while benefiting from the higher saturation elsewhere. Her eyes gleamed. We will build a society from the ashes of our mistakes. We will live as the Thayan do, composed of essence itself. We will not merely walk bound worlds, we will flourish in them. We will grow in attunement until we rival dragons. Selfish recoiled. That's madness. How many worlds have we already purged? Mora's jaw tightened and anger flared. None of those worlds would have been saved without us. We rescue who we can. We salvage what remains. We are not criminals. Selfish swallowed. I'm a transitional breach tour, she said suddenly. My first assignments were to open rifts to high saturation worlds. Her breath came faster as the realization struck. I helped do that. I helped increase saturation. She looked at Mora, shaken. Are you telling me that I caused the Noctium? Mora's voice softened. No, it's not your fault. Those worlds were already unstable, already being saturated by unknown rifts. We opened controlled breaches to measure, to estimate, and to rescue before the correction occurs. She leaned in closer. Without those rifts, we would be blind. The explanation was elegant, scientific, and comforting, and Selfish didn't believe a word of it. Still, she sat in the transport with one of the most powerful tour in existence. She felt the danger settle deep in her bones. She knew better than to press further. How much time do we have? She asked. Mora gave her a sad smile. 6 months, a year at most. Selfish's eyes widened. Is it always that fast? No, Mora hesitated. Outside forces accelerated this Noctium. It was likely engineered. The Worldbreaker? Selfish finished her thought. Mora didn't deny it. And for the first time, Selfish wondered if Rylan might be right. Chapter 93, Ghent. Ghent was well out of town, tearing down a road that had needed repair for decades. He didn't swerve for potholes, didn't slow unless the road forced him to. He drifted between lanes at reckless speed, the engine howling as the world blurred past his windows. It had been days since the seeing boy had glanced at him, and it was time to go home. Finally. He was pushing close to 100 miles an hour through a wide bend when something formed in his headlights. Ghent didn't slow. He didn't care. It was a distraction. The figure vaulted clean over the car at the last second, dark shape arcing through the air. Ghent slammed the brakes, tires screaming as the vehicle skidded sideways. Before it was at a complete stop, he was already grinning, and he stepped out into the night, eager for whatever new delight had finally come to feed him. He had been so hungry. He walked into the darkness without hesitation, head level, steps unhurried. He didn't search. He didn't need to. She stood in the middle of the road, waiting. She looked human at first glance. Mostly. There was something wrong in the way she held herself, in the tension beneath her skin. Her smile caught the light, sharp and knowing. Ghent smiled back. They charged at each other, both eager for what was to come. She moved with the fluid grace of a great predatory cat, muscles coiling and releasing with terrifying precision and strength. He hit like a bear, her instincts honed and ruthless. Ghent learned in seconds that the fragile human shell he wore would not suffice. She struck where a human liver would have been. Fragile creature with needless organs would have been critically wounded by the single swift blow. Shadows spilled from the wound like blood, pouring out from the flesh he wore until the human form collapsed as he burst free, swelling into a churning mass of liquid black, tendrils lashing outward, whipping the air as he surged toward her, a great egg-shaped core roiling with hunger and delight. She retreated, dodging every strike, boots scraping against cracked asphalt. Light flared from her hand, brilliant and searing, and Ghent reeled as it washed over him. When his senses returned, she was already running. She darted into the trees at the roadside. Ghent laughed as the forest answered his call. Vines and branches twisted violently, growing and lashing out to bind her. She cursed in a language he didn't know, tearing free as the thinner growth snapped under strain. If the woods had been denser, if the brush was thicker, they might have held her. She vanished instead. Ghent reached out, searching for her presence, tasting the world for the trick of it, but she was truly gone. With a frustrated hiss, he rolled back across the road, dragging himself towards the discarded skin. Crawling back into it was a slow, miserable process, taking more than a minute before the shape settled. He shook himself like a dog shedding water. Then he walked into the trees in search of his prey. He found a broken branch with fur and blood, bit the end clean off of it. The taste of it detonated through him. Ecstasy flooded his senses. Power and understanding crashed together in a rush so intense shadows burst from his mouth, spiraling outward in desperate search for more. He found only one more hair, one more drop of blood, and he consumed it all. The rest of the drive home was miserable, and he was more hungry than ever. It only took 30 minutes. The farmhouse loomed in the darkness, its freshly dug cellar yawning beneath it. Ghent dropped through a crude opening and into the damp earth below. where the flayed skins of a dozen victims hung drying. He burst free from the Ghent body once more. Splitting himself took hours. Nearly a full day passed before the dark mass divided, one orb becoming two. At last, one half crawled back into the skin, while the other began to divide again. He would need to eat before he split any more, but now he had a target. Not the seeing boy, not the commanding voice, none of the silly children that he'd been chasing for so long. Something stronger, something worth devouring. He would find her, he would consume her, and when he did, he might finally have enough power to ignore the girl's commands, to hide from the seeing boy's eyes, and to truly feast. Chapter 94, Monsters. Fouette wrapped cloth carefully around her forearm, pulling it tight with her teeth before securing the knot. The holographic display hovered nearby, projecting Rylan inside a container house. As he worked at a terminal, his attention divided between code and her concerns. "We need to reveal it to the Shapers," Fouette said at last. "There might be another solution," Rylan replied absently, fingers dancing across his interface. Fouette's eyes narrowed. "What kind of solution?" She didn't wait for him to answer. "Never mind. You know we have to act. If we don't, it will be left here with novices." "I know," Rylan said, "but if it's a threat to you, I may need to banish it with the Shapers." "I've never heard of anything like it, Ry." Fouette turned fully towards the projection. Her voice was tight, almost panicked. Rylan paused and finally looked at her. "I understand. We'll take care of it." "Why not let the Shapers do the work for us?" Fouette pleaded. Rylan lifted the imaging device and carried it outside the container house, setting it down on a small table before returning to his tasks. "Mostly because I don't trust them to do what should be done." Fouette shook her head, frustration bleeding through. "Ry, this is serious. It is extremely dangerous, and we know nothing about it. We know it isn't native. We know it's a leech of some kind. We know it absorbs essence and can manipulate whatever it takes in, and we know it's hungry." Rylan continued working. His voice was steady. "Do you think it was trying to leave the city? Escape the Shapers? How did you track it so far out?" "I don't know why it was outside the city," Fouette admitted, "but it wasn't hard to follow. Its essence is incredibly strong. His control is terrible, and he generates so much excess that he leaves a trail behind him. Tracking him took less than an hour." Rylan turned back to the projection, frowning. "That's normal for essence predators. Why does that shock you?" "I think he's connected to the wells," Fouette said carefully. "I don't think he knows it yet." She took a steadying breath. "He's far more powerful than we would believe possible for any creature in this world." Rylan closed his eyes. "That makes sense and is very unfortunate. Trails essence as if he's overflowing with it." Rylan stood and stretched, thinking. "I might be able to solve two problems at once by luring him to the Shapers," Fouette offered. "The null essence specialist?" Rylan asked, already knowing the answer. Fouette nodded once. "No," Rylan answered immediately and firmly. "If that creature acquired a null essence, it becomes a threat to anyone in any world." Fouette cursed under her breath. She had known that. She had just hoped it would be otherwise. "A leech with nullification and control of absorbed essence would be catastrophic," Rylan continued. "We can't risk that, not without knowing what it is and where it comes from." "What about the Shapers?" Fouette pressed. Rylan hesitated. "That feels especially cruel." Fouette frowned. "Would you banish it to a world with the Shapers later?" Rylan looked genuinely horrified. "No, it isn't native to a low essence environment. I'd try to send it home, or another world like it." "And wouldn't it still be a threat there?" "Of course it would," Rylan answered, "but in its native environment it shouldn't become unstoppable. Without knowing more, the only way to truly study it would be an expedition to its plane, and that's a risk we can't afford right now." Fouette sighed. "We need a solution. The Shapers still make sense." Rylan turned back to the projector and smiled faintly. "What about Click Click?" Fouette's eyes widened. "What if it kills him?" "Do you think it could?" Rylan asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated. "I don't know, but I don't think it's worth the risk." Click Click has no excess essence for it to consume, Rylan said thoughtfully. What if he can't harm it? Fouet countered. It's a massive shadowy liquid. I didn't manage to collect a sample, scratch it, do any harm of any kind. I'll speak with Click Click, Rylan decided. You handle surveillance in the Null Essence Tour. I want the Shapers distracted by their search for the seeds, not by their search for us. He paused. I'll call you once I've spoken with him. You may need him regardless. But glared. I won't need him to face the Null. I just need the Null to abandon its vessel. That will happen eventually. Don't underestimate the Shapers, Rylan warned. They're deeply invested in those children. They'll do everything they can to ensure I haven't turned them against the organization or to hinder them in other ways. They won't divert more resources. They can't. Not now, Fouet argued. Null essence is rare. Not rarer than dimensional essence, Rylan replied gently, and they've just acquired a new dimensional tour. Fouet exhaled slowly. I'll handle the Null specialist. You finish there, and then we can deal with the leech together. Rylan returned to his terminal. What did Aaron call it? Fouet grimaced before answering. Ghent. Chapter 95, Dragon. Aaron kept quiet about the secrets of the world that he simply began to understand. Didn't know how he knew what he knew, or how he could explain it to anyone else. The knowledge didn't feel learned. It felt present, supernatural, godlike. It carried the uncomfortable weight of something both wrong and right at the same time. Part of his power was suppressed, the loudest part, the kind that bent the world visibly. That much he could feel clearly, but the rest of it was more alive than it ever had been, even in the wells. He felt every life around him. Distant, flickering electrical signals pulsed through bodies and minds, tiny sparks dancing in vast invisible constellations. When he focused on them, he could decode them. Not thoughts exactly, not memories in the way people imagined mind reading. It was more like skimming a dense encyclopedia entry of someone's life. Not everything, just the deepest moments, the choices that shaped who they were. Understanding didn't come instantly either. He read the signals the way someone might read a foreign language, phonetically, without meaning. Then, as he considered them, listened to their cadence, the rise and fall of emotional weight, the story unfolded on its own, hazy at first. He'd heard people describe music the same way, movie buffs talking about how a score meant something only after it had passed. How the swelling note or a sudden silence carried emotion you didn't consciously notice until later. This was like that, as if he recorded lives and only understood them on playback. He barely understood himself. How could anyone else? So while his mind unraveled impossible things, he made casual conversation. The burgers are great. I love this song. Gin was never really my drink of choice. A laugh here, a nod there, a half smile in the right moment. It was almost nothing compared to what he was actually doing, but it was all anyone else saw. And the more unconcerned he appeared, the more comfortable everyone else became. The rest of his attention was fixed on the Shaper team stationed above the house, two of them on the roof, housed in a transport vehicle large enough to remove everyone inside if they needed to. They passed the time watching Earth media and mocking the only society Aaron had ever known. There were others scattered through the neighborhood as well, hidden, alert, waiting for resistance that never came. Once, only once, he felt something familiar on the edge of his perception. Careful, curious, approaching. Then, withdrawing when it noticed the Shaper presence. They'll be back, he thought. He hoped. Just not yet. He briefly considered whether the small group inside the house could overpower the soldiers if it came to that. The answer arrived immediately and decisively. No. So instead, he studied the Shapers. Ultimately, a month of training meant nothing in the face of a lifetime of study and dedication. So instead, he studied the Shapers. They were everywhere, across the globe, preparing to reveal themselves with a scale and precision that made even Earth's largest militaries look clumsy. He remembered some half-joking posts about how terrifying it was that the U.S. military could deploy a fast food restaurant anywhere in the world within 24 hours. This was worse. This was cities, not troops alone, but infrastructure. Families, cultures, packaged and deployed in hours, no supply lines, no delays, no improvisation. as if someone had bundled up San Francisco, loaded it into the sky, and dropped it into another world. If 60% of San Francisco were combat-trained wizards. The group inside had been avoiding television. He wasn't sure why. He hadn't noticed until he felt it. The sudden shift in attention as screens flickered on throughout the neighborhood, one by one, then dozens at once. He excused himself from a conversation and crossed the room, turning on the TV. The White House press room filled the screen, even flicking through channels. Eventually, the president walked calmly to the podium. After a long moment, he began to speak. My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak to you calmly, clearly, and honestly about a development unlike any we have faced before. Over the past several weeks, representatives of the United States government, along with our scientific, medical, and security communities, have been in contact with an unknown group of travelers who are not native to our world. They are real, they are technologically advanced, and they have made themselves known to us with the stated purpose of assistance, not conquest. I want to be absolutely clear about what we know, what we do not know, and what comes next. Firstly, there is no indication of hostile intent. These visitors have not issued demands. They have not seized control of governments or infrastructure. They have not threatened force. What they have done is begin repairing environmental damage in several locations around the globe, efforts that have been independently verified by our scientists and international partners. Second, they are offering knowledge, not authority. They have proposed voluntary training programs focused on resilience, disaster response, and long-term survival planning. Participation is not mandatory in any way. No laws are being rewritten. No institutions are being replaced. The United States remains governed by its Constitution. Third, we are not acting alone. I have been in direct contact with leaders from allied nations. International oversight is in place. Decisions are being made deliberately, not impulsively. There are questions we are still working to answer. I will not speculate or alarm you with unverified information, but I will tell you this. Humanity is not being replaced. Human choice still matters, and no decision about our future will be made without us being involved in it. We will move forward with caution, we will move forward with transparency, and we will move forward together. Thank you, and may God bless you all. He turned to leave the podium, but a reporter stood and spoke up to immediately ask a question. Mr. President, are we technologically outmatched? The President turned to answer. The United States maintains the most capable and adaptive defense systems on Earth, the President replied evenly. What matters right now is intent, and there is no indication of any hostile intent. Another voice cut in quickly. Travelers predict global catastrophes? Preparing for risk is not the same as predicting inevitability, he answered. Many scientists, ours included, have long warned of serious challenges ahead. They claim to want to assist us with this. A lady from the Free Press stood and asked, what happened if humanity refuses their help? This is not an ultimatum, the president said. It's a conversation. Another voice off camera. Are we still in control? Yes, the president said firmly, and we intend to remain so. Aaron stood with everyone else, eyes fixed on the screen. They were talking about the Shapers. They were preventing ecological collapse, repairing the ozone, saving humanity from itself. Was that possible? Cub clapped his hands together, breaking the silence. He shook his head and smiled as he looked around the room. Nah, he said simply. I don't trust him. Chapter 96. Things to Address. Part 1. Mora. The Shapers were in chaos. High Command was evacuating Sanctuary, finally confronted with the consequences of centuries of exploitation, extermination, and, most damning of all, the harvesting of entire worlds for their own gain. Until a week ago, those truths had existed only as rumors, whispers shared by the reckless or the desperate. Many who pulled too hard at the curtain had been smothered by airtight propaganda, carefully curated education, and quiet subterfuge. The curtain was gone now. Mora had no doubt that if the High Council had the freedom to do so, they would have canceled the Earth incursion outright. Sanctuary alone was catastrophe enough. Fortunately or unfortunately, they had far greater concerns than issuing orders to distant task forces on foreign worlds. They were running, scattering like roaches into fortified bases across hundreds of planets. Still, Mora would have heard something by now if the judges had been satisfied with exile. They weren't. The judges had not simply banished the Shapers from Sanctuary, they hunted them. World after world fell as Sanctuary forces tore through Shaper defenses as though they were soaked paper. Bases abandoned, strongholds breached, entire command structures shattered in hours. The Shaper intelligence assessment of Sanctuary's military capacity hadn't just been wrong, it had been catastrophically wrong. Calling it inaccurate felt like calling a flood a light rain. Mora exhaled slowly and stared at the tactical display hovering above her console. She briefly considered withdrawing her forces entirely and attempting to rejoin the High Council. It died as quickly as it formed. What would that accomplish? Her fleet would be one more fragment absorbed into the panic, one more voice screaming into the void. None of them understood. What worried her more was the question she hadn't dared ask aloud. Would the judges follow them to Earth? That fear was only one thread in a growing tangle. Rumors among the Earth forces were metastasizing, outpacing even the ugly truth. Lieutenants, captains, scientific teams, entire squads approached her with questions about Sanctuary, command integrity, and the sudden disappearance of Shaper leadership. Mora denied everything with practiced ease. There was no evidence to contradict her yet, so she enforced a full operational lockdown instead, all leave revoked, all personnel confined. She claimed the incursion timeline had accelerated and that absolute readiness was required. It worked. For now. Barely. Venrian's demeanor didn't help. His brooding silence, his visible doubt, spread through the ranks like an infection. Discipline wavered, confidence thinned. Mora could feel the structure cracking beneath her commands. Worst of all, she hadn't touched the incursion itself in days. The reveal was imminent, and they were not ready. She rubbed her temples, trying and failing to chase away the headache drilling behind her eyes. System, she said tightly, display all incursion tasks, assign priority, escalation to all required teams. A collective groan rippled through the bridge, subtle and controlled, but still unmistakable. They had already been stretched thin. Mora ignored it. She scanned the cascading lists of assignments and clenched her jaw till it ached. What more could she possibly do? What remained within her control? Running would solve nothing. No. She would complete this mission. The Shapers would survive this. Sanctuary could hunt them forever and still never find every world, every refuge, every contingency. She forced herself to work on everything at once, preparing to reveal the Shapers to the people of this primitive, infuriating world. Part 2. Orla. Orla's forces struck another Shaper base on another foreign world. She brought 50 adepts with her, each one capable, disciplined, and sharpened by Sanctuary's fury. Among them marched 2 Bright Guard knights, their presence alone enough to shatter morale. The towering Tor wore layered armor, etched with sigils older than most civilizations. Their massive two-handed blades moved as if weightless, slicing through resistance with ease. Essence attacks fizzled or broke harmlessly against them, nullified before impact. The reinforced command door melted under their advance. Orla entered the room with her spine straight and her expression calm. 3 Shaper commanders cowered inside. She flicked her wrist and released 3 small discs. They drifted forward, as if magnetized to the Shapers before her, adhering to skin and fabric alike. The moment they made contact, the room went silent with understanding. "Wait, no, please," one man screamed, scrambling backward, his already dark trousers darkening further as fear claimed him. The Bright Guard stood in the doorway. 3 glowing marbles floated into position before Orla. She studied the embroidery on the commanders' uniforms. Generals. "Were you aware," she asked evenly, "of the Noctium's effects on plundered worlds?" A chorus of frantic denials filled the room. All 3 marbles dimmed visibly. "And were any of you knowingly involved in orders that resulted in the extermination of civilizations?" Orla continued. One man shook his head violently. Another stared at the floor. The third whispered a no. The stones told the truth. Orla stepped toward the silent one. "You will answer my questions," she said commandingly. He looked up, tears streaming. "I'm sorry." She kicked him hard in the knee. He collapsed with a cry, sobbing as he hit the floor. And did the billions of people you erased, Orla asked, her voice trembling with restraint, have the opportunity to beg for your mercy? Oh, he wept. The marble continued to burn bright before her. Her blade of air flashed with a flick of her wrist. Blood spilled across his chest as his body fell. Orla turned to the man trembling against the wall, plucked one marble from the air, and regarded him evenly. Did you attempt to intervene, to rescue anyone? Even one world? Even one person? He shook his head, unable to speak. As it shook, it fell cleanly from his shoulders, toppling onto the floor, eyes open wide in horror. Orla bent and shut the eyes. Only one remained. Where were you planning to flee, General? The man straightened, pride flaring at the end. Incursion World 1068. His head followed the others. Orla inhaled deeply and turned to the bright guard. A lie, she said calmly. They had nowhere left to go. The knights remained motionless. As Orla walked away, sweat cooled on her skin. She wondered whether the bright guard had noticed the deception, and whether she would soon stand before another judge to answer for her own lies. She pushed the thoughts aside. Still, she wished she had acted faster. She wanted to give Rylan more time. Chapter 97. Giving Up. It had been 4 days. 4 days of blindness. Aaron, Cup, and Emily had stayed relentlessly upbeat. They laughed, they cooked, they talked about everything and anything except powers. When the subject came too close, they smothered it gently, said it wasn't worth worrying about, said Rylan and Vouette would come, said 1,000 things that sounded reassuring until Jake listened too closely and realized they were just excuses dressed up as hope. He wanted to scream. He hadn't felt this bored, this empty, this useless since grade school, since before he'd discovered his sight. He'd forgotten what life had been like without it, forgotten how small the world felt when you could only see what was right in front of you. For 2 days, he barely left his bed. He stared at the ceiling, rotting, trying not to think about the fact that everyone else seemed content to be normal again. That thought made something twist in his chest. Normal wasn't a relief. Normal was a cage. Normal was just a curse he couldn't accept. He didn't just wish for his powers back. He worked at it. He tried 1,000 times to see through the eyes that used to exist just beyond himself. He tried new angles, new focuses. He imagined changing how his powers worked, reshaping it, tricking it, forcing it to adapt. Lying flat on his back, he raised his arms towards the ceiling and made slow, awkward movements, as if sculpting something invisible. He imagined magic flowing through his hands, not sight, something else, something physical. A drone. No, too complex. He settled on a shape, a semi-translucent sphere, about the size of a softball, weightless, smooth, barely there. For a heartbeat, he thought he could see it. He thought he could feel the cool, perfect surface resting in his palm. Then he blinked, and it vanished. Jake exhaled sharply and heard laughter drifting from outside the door. Someone was happy. Someone was fine with this. The sound made his stomach turn. He pushed himself upright with a grunt and stared at his open hand again. This time, he imagined a mechanical bug. He tried for a dragonfly, but his mind betrayed him, and it came out wrong. A grasshopper body with butterfly wings. He frowned, annoyed at himself, and closed his hand around it. Something crunched, and Jake froze. He opened his hand slowly. Fine crystalline dust coated his palm. Not much, barely anything at all, but it glittered faintly in the light. He could feel where the thing had collapsed under his grip. His breath came faster. He jumped to his feet and fled to the kitchen, adrenaline crashing into hunger. He poured himself an enormous bowl of cereal, enough for 2 meals, maybe 3 if you believed the serving sizes on the box. He was smiling at it when he realized there was no milk. Hey, he called out, trying not to sound irritated. We're out of milk. Can we get some? Aaron pointed at a whiteboard on the wall without looking up. Put it on the list. We'll get more delivered. Jake rolled his eyes. He didn't want delivery. He wanted out. He wanted movement. He wanted to do something. He scrawled milk on the board in letters far too large, then paused and added chocolate bars, ice cream, and cookies underneath before stalking back to his room. At night, when everyone slept, he had to share it. During the day, they crowded into the living room and the backyard like this was a vacation home. He ate dry cereal with one hand and imagined another construct in the other. This one looked like a mouse with wings, and he didn't know why. He knew perfectly well what a dragonfly looked like. He shook his head. The creature shattered again. More dust, shiny, gritty, real. Whatever this was, he was going to chase it. It wasn't sight, but it was something he could push, something he could learn. For a moment, the thought crossed his mind that he might be losing it. Then he stood, walked into the hallway. Nina was leaning against the wall, half watching the living room. Jake thrust his closed hand towards her face. "Do you see this?" he demanded. She flinched and swatted his hand away. "What the hell, Jake? Stop!" He clutched his fist tighter and dodged back. "Do you see what's in my hand?" Nina frowned and leaned closer. "Is that glitter?" Jake grinned, bounced once on his toes, and spun back towards his room. "Nope," he called back simply. It was real, actually real. All he had to do now was figure out how it worked and what it was. He didn't know how long he'd been experimenting when someone knocked on the door. The sound snapped through his focus like a gunshot. "What?" Jake snapped. Cup opened the door, relaxed as ever. "What's up, kid?" Jake glared at him. He liked Cup. He just didn't want him here. Not now. Cup leaned against the frame, eyebrows raised. "What are you working on?" he asked with his trademark grin. "Nothing," Jake muttered, having his half-eaten cereal and shoving a handful into his mouth. Cup watched him chew. "You get your eyes back?" Jake garbled something unintelligible. Cup chuckled. "Whatever. I was thinking we should start a club or something. For the wizard crowd?" Jake paused. That sounded cool. Cup kept going. "Like one of those houses. Gryffindor, Birdhouse. You read those books, right?" Jake laughed, cereal flying everywhere as he choked mid-snort. He coughed violently, spitting soggy flakes back into the bowl. Cup waited, amused and patient. "Yeah," Jake said finally, wiping his mouth and shaking his head. "I read them. We can do way better than that." "Oh yeah?" Cup shrugged. "What's better?" "The X-Men?" Jake nearly shouted. "Ninjas, robots, pirates, dragons, literally everything is cooler than that." Cup laughed. "All right, think about it. Finish breakfast. We'll write ideas on the whiteboard tonight." Jake nodded quickly. "Yeah, I'll think." Cup left, closing the door softly behind him. Jake stared after him, and then looked down at his cereal. He took another bite, half dry, half soggy with his saliva, and immediately spit it out with a grimace. He set the bowl aside, and then he went back to work. Chapter 98. Hunting. Ghent's hunger gnawed at him. It was not a hunger any human body could understand. It did not ebb or dull. It did not respond to distraction or time. It pressed inward, constant and merciless, a demand that did not ask, but commanded. He had tasted real power. The moment it touched him, he had known it. Every note, every texture of it. For years he had wandered the streets of Rancho, harvesting what passed for nourishment. A dozen lives, a dozen small, forgettable flavors, enough to exist, enough to endure. That girl on the road had been something else entirely. She was a steak in a real restaurant, a meal so rich it made every bite he had ever taken before taste like ash. Compared to her, everything else was sewage and rot, though he left Rancho behind. He felt the pulsing heart of civilization far to the west and turned towards it instinctively, towards the ocean and the dense sprawl of humanity. He did not understand human rituals or rules. He mimicked them as best he could, but they scraped against him like ill-fitting skin. The act of pretending chafed, itched. He would endure any discomfort for another taste of what she was. He would let every body he wore die screaming if it meant wearing that skin for even a minute. His form spread out, thinning, stretching across miles like bloodhounds on a trail. Each fragment of himself sniffed and searched, following the faintest traces, discarding false leads and scraps without a thought. The greatest cities he passed through were thick with lives, once a banquet, now unbearable. The residue of power that had sustained him days ago turned his stomach now. He had tasted what was and what could be. He would not settle for less. One of his bodies drove through the busy streets of a coastal metropolis when he felt it. True power again. The sensation struck him so hard the flesh he wore seized, muscles locking as if shocked. He abandoned the vehicle in the middle of traffic and staggered onto the sidewalk. Every ounce of his will required just to remain upright. The body breathed hard, chest heaving, drool slipping past slacked lips as he moved towards the source. Closer, closer. Pedestrians stared at the well-dressed homeless man, clearly out of his mind. Some crossed the street, others recoiled instinctively, but a single man unraveling in public was not unusual enough to demand attention. Ghent was mostly ignored. 1,000 eyes slid over him without seeing. His head tilted back in rapture as the scent split into 3 distinct notes. 3! Slightly weaker than the girl, maybe, but still divine. Still impossibly rich compared to anything he had fed on before. They were right there, around the corner, through a door. He would feast again. The flesh body drooled and spasmed as he moved. Shadows began to leak from his eyes, his mouth, his ears. Thin tendrils at first, barely smoke. But as he turned the corner and saw them, the spill became a flood. Darkness poured out of him like a stream, obscuring his upper body entirely. The 3 turned. They saw him. Too late. They ran. Ghent surged after them, and the body he wore protested violently. It was too slow, too fragile. The skin split as he sprinted, tearing open as more shadow burst free. He no longer bothered containing it. He leapt 30 feet in a single bound, slamming into the weakest of them. For the first time, his hunger sank fully into living flesh. Shadows plunged deep, drinking organs and bone, then whatever essence clung stubbornly to the remains. Minutes passed as he drank, or an eternity. Time lost all meaning until the body disappeared entirely into him. Ghent straightened, shadows curling back towards his core, and looked up. The remaining 2 had barely made it 100 yards. They were sprinting, and he was still hungry. He smiled, and then he ran them down. Chapter 99, Motivation. Everyone was crammed into the living room. It was crowded, too warm. Even with the air conditioning running at full blast, the heat was creeping in, clinging to skin and fabric alike. No one moved away. No one spoke. The revelations of the day washed over them in slow, crushing waves, one after another, until reacting was impossible. Occasionally, someone glanced around the room, searching for a familiar expression, only to find every other face locked on the screen. There were hours of videos, days maybe. They all began the same way, an announcement from a group calling themselves the Shapers. They were extra-dimensional travelers, people mostly, or things that resembled people in some way. Some looked human enough to pass in a crowd. Others looked like legends pulled straight from myth and folklore. Pictures from stories that had never been meant to be real. And some were so alien they defied explanation entirely, their forms twisting logic in ways that felt unintentional, watching an AI hallucinate anatomy. The Shapers claimed to come from alternate worlds, other Earths, other evolutionary paths. They said magic was real, called it magic, plainly, deliberately, probably because it was the simplest word humanity had for it. They were here to fix Earth. The ozone layer, nuclear arsenals, waste management, disease, climate collapse. They laid out ultimatums to every nation, demanding an end to cruelties both well-known and deliberately hidden. War of the fucking worlds, Cup muttered at one point. No one answered him. The video kept playing, localized announcements for cities, states, countries, hours. That was the timeline. In 2 days, Shaper forces would be stationed in every major city on the planet. In places they couldn't reach immediately, schedules were already posted for essence testing and medical outreach. Rancho alone would have 5 Shaper locations. Each site had security protocols, organizational charts, appointment scheduling, websites, cleaner and faster than anything any government agency had ever managed to run. They responded to inquiries almost instantly. They made it very clear they were not affiliated with any existing government. They didn't need to be, and they didn't want to be. Training videos were already everywhere, every platform Earth had, plus an entirely new one managed by the Shapers themselves. Most of the instructors spoke with perfect idioms, flawless cadence, expressions tuned precisely to Earth culture. Some of the videos were taught by monsters. They were racial orientation videos, and they all watched in awe. The Shapers explained that Earth's biological sciences were mostly correct, just incomplete. According to their classification system, intelligent life existed across every domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Thousands upon thousands of sapient forms, too many to cover in any single setting, too many to cover in a lifetime of study. But those videos existed too. Scientists across the world were already dissecting them, adding annotations, comparing notes. The Shaper's taxonomy expanded Earth's own. New branches, new rules, new assumptions. Before anyone could begin to process that, another video started. Dimensional vessels, floating cities in the sky, entire populations suspended above the planet, each housing more than 1 million Shapers. They explained how their society worked: currency, education, military service, voting rights, law enforcement, crime and punishment. Systems refined over centuries, presented cleanly and confidently. It was an advanced civilization that withstood the tests of time. Their history was available, their knowledge, with surprisingly few redactions as far as anyone could tell. The addition of magic made everything exponentially harder to understand. Even those in the room who had used magic, who had trained in sanctuary, felt like children staring at a blackboard written in a language they only half recognized. Questions surfaced occasionally. Someone would ask how much of something there was, whether there was a video that explained one detail better than another. Cup held the remote, clicking through links and menus as curiosity dragged him onward. The others let him lead, at least for now. Eventually, phones came out. Tablets, laptops, different videos played simultaneously, different subjects, different depths. The room fractured into quiet pockets of focus, all of them absorbing the same truth from different angles. Hours passed. Eventually, conversations started again. Not reactions so much as processing. Small groups formed, still watching and reading and still scrolling. They shared the details that struck them hardest. The things that didn't sit right. The things that seemed too good to be true. Jake slipped away to his room with a borrowed tablet. It took him less than 40 minutes to find what he was looking for. The material was buried behind required videos, ones he let play without fully absorbing, his mind skimming what it already understood. Finally, he found it. Exercises, training modules designed to teach manifestation when blocked, when suppressed, when cut off from external sources. Jake leaned closer to the screen. For the first time in days, he smiled, and he went back to work. Chapter 100: Oversights. Mora had been working for 30 hours straight. The bridge lights had dimmed and brightened twice to simulate a cycle of rest she hadn't taken. She stood at her station, shoulders tight, eyes moving methodically through flagged launch tasks that required the highest level of authorization. Thousands of decisions waited on her approval. Questions, contingencies, legal frameworks, cultural accommodations. The full architecture of shaper recruitment and training unfurled before her in layered panels. Already, nations across Earth had begun labeling the operation propaganda. Some attempted to block the videos outright. Others tried subtler approaches: bandwidth throttling, maintenance outages, legal injunctions drafted in a dozen languages. It hadn't mattered. The Shaper AI had cataloged every attempt, countered them cleanly, and published a public index in response. Countries, departments, agencies, dual offenders, all listed as ineligible for direct benefit from Shaper operations on Earth. The list was already hundreds of thousands of names long and growing every second. Within days, it would be millions. Mora didn't review it. There wasn't time, and more importantly, there was no need. The AI's capacity for pattern recognition, intent modeling, and predictive behaviors was as close to perfect as reality allowed. If it flagged someone, they were a liability. Instead, Mora focused on her own ever-expanding queue of decisions. Gray area executive calls, mostly straightforward, all-consuming. She issued directives to departments and adjusted parameters within the AI's mandate, shaping the incursion with careful precision. Fenrian arrived at her station and stood at attention. She glanced up at him briefly, then returned to her work. He wasn't scheduled to report yet, which meant whatever he was bringing her involved immediate risk, likely tied to the security of her teams as they prepared to make the physical contact with Earth's populations the following day. Commander, Fenrian said. Speak quickly, Mora replied without looking up. A Shaper team has been ambushed and killed in a city under our management, he said evenly. San Francisco. That made her stop. Mora lifted her gaze and narrowed her eyes. Untrained recruits? No, ma'am. Celebrated and capable tour. Fenrian's tone remained steady. The footage is on your panel. The ship's AI system pulled up the video instantly. It was barely a minute long. Mora didn't realize her mouth had fallen open until it was already happening. The footage showed shadows moving with intent, precision, violence executed too cleanly, too effectively. The tour never stood a chance. Potential light tour, Fenrian said carefully. Clearly not illusions. Training across multiple disciplines. It could be a judge from Sanctuary. He sounded hopeful when he said it. Mora shook her head slowly. No, that's a leech. Her voice hardened. Very capable one. Native to a world with at least 3 saturation, maybe more. She exhaled sharply. We'll need a specialized team immediately. Fenrian nodded, disappointment flickering across his expression before discipline smothered it. I can't spare you for this, Mora continued, meeting his eyes. You're in charge of security while the world turns against us. You're the only one I trust to hold that line. She paused to ensure that the words landed. If you can secure external aid, do so. Otherwise, assemble a team that can end this decisively. They cannot fail, and we cannot afford losses right now. Fenrian straightened and saluted. I'll need Emristel, he said, null essence, to ensure team survival. Mora considered it longer than she liked. Finally, she sighed, approved. Then more quietly, send an artifact to main control over the Worldbreaker's students. Ensure they remain monitored and suppressed. Fenrian nodded once and turned, leaving the bridge at a brisk pace. Mora closed her eyes. She didn't like coincidence. She didn't like convergence. And she hated, truly hated, how many small, unrelated variables were beginning to align at once. It felt wrong, like a pattern she hadn't accounted for, like a trap slowly tightening. Another priority alert flashed across her display, a communication from Shaper Council. Her chest tightened. She expected a recall, a cancellation, new orders stripping her of command. She opened the message, read it, then read it again. The third time, she slowed down, parsing every word with care. The Shapers were declaring war on Sanctuary. Project Paradise had been elevated to a top priority. Her mission was unchanged, but sharpened. Recruit every man, woman, and child on Earth who might benefit the Shapers in the coming conflict. Work quickly, withdraw as soon as feasible. Mora leaned back slightly, tension easing for the first time in days. That, at least, was excellent news. Thank you for listening to Part 10 of 10,000 Worlds, written and read for you by Weston Gill. That's me. I appreciate every one of you in my audience, and I hope you're really enjoying the journey so far. If you can, subscribe and give a like. I would really appreciate that as well. I also appreciate your comments, feedback, and suggestions. You can also find me on my YouTube channel, where the videos are posted 1 chapter at a time, instead of in 10 chapter chunks. I encourage you to follow me there at Venture Saga. Thank you so much.